Hello, it is Sherry Weiss, and for our September mentor meeting, we are going to be focusing on helping our new teachers set their professional goals. We know that this can be an intimidating experience for our new hires, and so we just want to talk about a couple of ways that we can support our new hires in this process. So what is our objective for our September meeting? Today you are going to individually review the expectations and requirements of the goal setting process, and we're also going to have some time for you to reflect on how you've supported your mentee so far. Of course, the bigger picture, the so what, is so that we can support our mentee in establishing focused goals that are based on the evaluation standards and based on the student data. And then the measurable component, you'll know you have it when you can support your mentee in reflecting on student learning, on their teaching practice, and their student data so that they can create realistic annual goal statements. And a lot of times new teachers need so much support with setting annual goals because they are so overwhelmed and so inundated with the day-to-day tasks that it's really hard for them to set time aside to reflect and to set new goals. They're just trying to keep their nose above water. They're just trying to stay afloat, and so they don't really know where to start. They can't see the long term because they're in that survival mode, spending statistics tell us 70 hours a week on schoolwork. So that's really why they need a lot of support when it comes to setting that annual goal, that goal that's going to expand and be with them the entire school year. One of the resources that's in the Mentor Handbook that you may or may not have used, if you haven't already used it with your new teacher, I would encourage you to think about using it. It's on page 16 in the handbook, and it's called the Springboard Evaluation. And what it does is it's just kind of a conversation starter for you and your new teacher. If, every time you try to have a conversation with them, they say everything is going fine, or they, nothing seems to be going right for them, it can help you kind of prioritize what are their major concerns. And so if something's, if they're ranking it extremely difficult for prioritizing time or implementing the curriculum, you know that that's really where your focus needs to be, and that you need to be trying to help them find resources to teach the curriculum. So again, you don't have to use the Springboard Evaluation sheet with them, but if you haven't already looked at that in your handbook, I would invite you to look at that and just consider whether that would be an appropriate tool to use with your new teacher. So when we think about the phase that the new teacher is currently in, they are currently in survival phase. And so they have moved out of the anticipation phase that was, before school started and teacher work week, and now they are fully ensconced. It's September, and they are fully ensconced in the survival phase. And so what I would invite you to do, and there's an assignment in Google Classroom that discusses this as well, you will read an article that the New Teacher Center has published about these 5 phases of a first year's teaching cycle. It'll give you a quick synopsis of what does the anticipation phase look like, what's the survival phase look like, what's the disillusionment phase, the rejuvenation phase, and the reflection phase look like. And of course we know, again, it's September, that most new hires are now in the survival phase. And so you would just read that article, and then there's a Google assignment that asks you to just kind of chart and fill in a table showing some of the key characteristics of the disillusionment phase. What are some of the key characteristics of the survival phase? And since that's where our newbie is right now, we really want to think about where are they right now, what are their needs, and what do they need from you? Do they need you to be an advocate? Do they need you to be a facilitator? Do they need you to just listen to them? Or do they need you to be a resource and help coach them through this difficult time? So we want to think back to those roles that we looked at in our August meeting and think about which role is appropriate at this point to serve your new teacher. So when we think about what effective teachers are, they are reflective. And so we want to help our teacher be reflective, although we said that's difficult for them right now because they're in survival mode. And so we want to provide feedback, make sure that it's non-judgmental, non-evaluative feedback, that it's not opinion statements. Again, we looked at that in our August meeting, and we gave you those sampling of statements to kind of look at, is that a statement that is just evidence-based of what's going on, or was it opinion-based? We want to help our new teachers be persistent. When we set those annual goals, we want to help them establish high expectations and then provide equity to all students in the classroom. And again, we want to help our new teachers stay curious. We want them to feel that they can ask questions. We want them to experiment with different teaching strategies and different formats to figure out what works for them, and most importantly, what works for the students in their classroom. So one of the ways that you can facilitate that conversation is by using the collaborative assessment log. And again, hopefully you have already found that, page 13 in your handbook. Hopefully you're using that with your meetings. If you've been meeting with your new teacher and not using this document, I would really caution you against that. By using this form, it just kind of helps the new teacher realize that there are certain protocols that you have to follow as their mentor, that this is a task that is taken seriously by the division, and that we want to support them in the best way possible. And so you will just make copies of page 13 from your handbook. You need to print extra copies. Again, the handbook is found in our Google Classroom. And you want to start the conversation each week when you meet with your new teacher by talking about what's working. So get them to describe recent examples of things that have been successful in their classroom or in their lesson planning, in their assessment. What evidence do they have of the decisions that they've made that have led to that success? Why are those things working? If they say classroom management's working, well, why is it working? What have they done? What decisions have they made? What have they put in place to make classroom management be going smoothly? If they can't think of anything that's working, if they're feeling overwhelmed, then hopefully you're able to share some evidence of things that you've observed that are working. And then we also want to think about being able to tie that to the language of the teaching standards. And we'll come back to the teaching standards later and address those, but think about how, as a teacher, when they're observed by their administrator, what key things is an administrator going to be looking at? So alignment, student engagement, assessment. Do they have assessment embedded throughout the lesson, both formative and summative assessment? What does the classroom management look like? What does professionalism look like? Those sorts of things. You also, each time you meet with your new teacher, want to have a discussion about what should their current focus be. What are they concerned about? Make sure that you paraphrase the teacher's concerns so that way you can adequately represent them. We also want to, again, tie those to the teaching standards that we just referenced. And then again, we want to help them prioritize those concerns. And again, that's where that springboard evaluation sheet from page 16 in the handbook may be helpful if they're just kind of feeling overwhelmed and feel that nothing's working. That way they can kind of rank the major components and determine what should be their top priority for now. And then you also, as the mentor, need to be prepared to bring some critical issues to the conversation. If they think that classroom management is a strength, but based on your observations, you know that may need to be a current focus, you need to be prepared to use your mentoring language and invite the teacher to consider ways to embed new strategies into their practice, new protocols into their practice, or maybe they need to think about their transitions or think about their pacing, and is that impacting classroom management. And then, of course, during your meeting, you would establish next steps that are doable, a few measurable short-term objectives, make sure that you identify and clarify the commitments for both the beginning teacher, what do they need to do, and what are you responsible for doing as the mentor. And of course, you'll just want to make sure that you all discuss how what you're talking about in these meetings, how is it having a result? Is it having an impact on their practice? And then you would want to establish when you're going to meet again and what would be the focus of your next meeting. Again, this is a strength-based approach, and it really provides a purpose for the meeting so that way you don't just have those meetings where, oh, how's everything going? Oh, everything's going great. That sort of thing. It makes sure that it is purposeful and taken seriously. Of course, the interesting thing is right about now you might also be thinking, why me? Why am I serving as a mentor? I'm overwhelmed by my own curriculum or by the grade book. All these different things that are always changing in education. And so I just want to remind you that you are there because you are considered an expert in the field. And so just make sure that you are a good example, that you're a good example in your classroom management, in your professional relationships, in your communication. and that you are not bad-mouthing division initiatives, you're not bad-mouthing school-level initiatives, you are not bad-mouthing colleagues, administrators, whether that's at the building or the division level, to your new hire. We want to make sure that we are always being that consistent beacon of professionalism for our new hire. And sometimes that's hard because, again, you've got a million things to do. You have a to-do list that's always growing. And so we want to make sure that through our body language, through our actions, that you are not looking so frazzled and so busy yourself that you're telling your new teacher non-verbally that you don't have time. You don't have time to listen to their concerns because you've got enough of your own concerns. And so just make sure that you provide personal time and attention to the beginning teacher. Your time is the most valuable thing that you can give them right now. Not your expertise necessarily, but just time so that they know you are there to support them and that they're not being a burden to you. Real quickly, I just want you to reflect on these. We're obviously not going to be sharing your responses, but just some things to think about as we serve as a mentor. Have we done these things? So have we used educational jargon with the beginning teacher? If you have talked about the SCT process or PBIS, or if they want to sign up for classes in ERO, do they know what those acronyms mean? We kind of just referenced this a second ago. We want to make sure you don't overextend yourself, because if you do, you're of no help and you're not available to your new teacher. Think about professionalism. Have you already invited them in to observe you? You will probably want to invite them to observe you before you go in and observe them. Another great step is for you and your new teacher to go in and observe another master teacher, especially if you know that they are struggling with a specific thing. If you know that another teacher has a strength in that area, if they're struggling with higher level questioning, if they're struggling with grouping of students, if they're struggling with differentiation, whatever they're struggling with, if you know a teacher who has that strength, if not, go to your administrator and see if they could recommend somebody that you all could go in and observe together, so that way you can have that dialogue about it. Again, we just talked about availability and being positive. Okay. Again, we don't want to be the problem solver. That's not our goal. We want them to move them forward in their practice. We want to help them engage in that productive struggle. They're going to struggle. We don't want to remove all the struggles from them. We want to make sure it's a productive struggle, though, so that they are moving forward in their practice. But we don't want to just solve everything for them. And again, we just want to think about listening. And you can read those components for yourself about what is effective listening. We don't want to make a mini-me. Our new teacher may have completely different classroom management style from you. That's okay. They may have different ideas about instructional strategies. That's okay. They may have a different view about how to use technology appropriate in the classroom. That's okay. You don't have to force them to adopt your teaching philosophy, your teaching pedagogy. You are there to listen, support, and move them forward in their practice. This is another chart that the New Teacher Center has that's just kind of helpful to think about. That when you're trying to establish and build this relationship with your new teacher, it's kind of helpful to think about it that it's never a stagnant relationship. Either you're constantly moving forward or you're constantly tearing down trust. You're either building trust or destroying trust. And so these are just some things to think about ways to ensure that you are building trust, that you are building that collaborative working environment with your new teacher. One of the other things that we're going to look at is goal setting. We mentioned that earlier, that's one of the key things that a new teacher needs support with. And so our second video is going to really look at goal setting and helping the teacher establish that SMART goal and how you can be an active role in that process.